Hello and welcome to another video lecture for Mr. Mosier's 8th grade U.S. History class. This particular video lecture is part of our Civil Rights unit. This section we're going to be looking at something known as Black Power. And the image you see here is a very famous image from the 1968 Summer Olympics where two American athletes will put their fists up into the air as a symbol of Black Power and Black Pride. They'll eventually get their medals stripped for this political action that happens at the ceremony. But we're going to talk about why that clenched fist, what that kind of means a little bit, and what does Black Power kind of refer to as part of the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and into the 1970s. The textbook readings for today comes from pages 876 to 881. This is the section dealing with Kennedy, Johnson, and civil rights. Kind of our guiding question today is what was meant by the term Black Power? Who was Malcolm X? How was his approach different to civil rights than Dr. King? And then what is the Nation of Islam? So those are going to be our topics here for today. By the time we get to the mid to late 1960s, there is starting to become a growing frustration among the African American community on the slow progress of civil rights movement and Dr. King's civil disobedience approach of nonviolence to bring about these changes. Now, despite the changes of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights of 1965, big, important laws that get passed, in terms of immediate action in many communities across the country, there's still a great deal of racism and segregation and problems. And for a lot of African Americans, they are growing more and more frustrated. And so you start seeing the Black Power movement really beginning to take shape by the time we get to the mid and late 60s. Black Power had kind of two important elements to it. One was a pride in African Americans' African roots, their African heritage. This is the time when you start seeing more of the Afro, the African beading jewelry, the colors of red and green and black, colors of black nationalism becoming more and more prevalent. And also a part of Black Power, of the Black Power movement, was a belief in a black nation called black nationalism. That perhaps integration, as Dr. King would describe it as I Have a Dream speech of whites and blacks living together harmlessly and peacefully, many started questioning in the African American community if that could ever possibly happen. So maybe there needs to be a call for black nationalism. So we see during the 1960s and 1970s this Black Proud movement beginning to take shape. The musician James Brown definitely kind of captivates this feelings and attitude of the Black Proudness and Black Power movement with Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. We're going to listen to a little piece of the song here right now. And it goes on and says, look at here, some people say we've got a lot of malice, some say it's a lot of nerve. I say we won't quit moving till we get what we deserve. We've been buked, we've been scorned, we've been treated bad, talked about as sure as you've been born. But just as sure as it takes two eyes to make a pair, brother, we can't quit until we get our share. So there's definitely this sense of frustration and the need to keep pushing for civil rights. We also see an emergence of a very different type of civil rights leader emerging here in the mid-1960s, and this is Malcolm X. Malcolm X really urged African Americans to be very proud of their race and African roots. He said that African Americans should really build their own businesses and defend themselves, which is very different than Dr. King's approach of civil disobedience and nonviolence. Malcolm X's approach was a little bit more of civil rights by any means necessary, more confrontational and perhaps even more violence as a possibility. Now, Malcolm X, from his experiences as a child growing up here and serving time in jail, he was very uneasy about African Americans and whites working together. By the time he gets close to his assassination by the end of the 1960s, however, he begins to start to change a little bit after he spent some time in Saudi Arabia at a pilgrimage in Mecca, where he sees all different people from all different walks of life around the world worshiping Islam peacefully at Mecca. He starts to change his tune here a little bit and talks a bit more about coexistence. Malcolm X is really a very complex character, and it's easy to sometimes point him as the anti-Dr. King. And in a lot of ways, both him and Malcolm X and Dr. King had very similar goals in mind, and probably are a lot closer in some regards than they are different. But there were definitely some distinct differences between the two civil rights leaders here. The Nation of Islam, which is the organization that Malcolm X belonged to, definitely called for this idea of black nationalism in the 1960s. And so it's a little bit more of a confrontational approach here to civil rights during this time period. So as we start looking here at the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we start seeing more of a confrontation beginning to emerge in society as frustrations begin to kind of really take shape and are created. We see that with the Nation of Islam, another organization called the Black Panther Movement, which is a little more militant in their push for ending racism and segregation. And so we start seeing a little bit more of different aspects and views and different approaches in terms of what's the best way to bring about the end of racism and segregation. Thank you for listening. As always, if you have questions, please make sure you come talk to me. Thanks for listening.